any concerns about coming here today?
Absolutely. When I heard what you had to go through, I mean, look, I had concerns for the institution of the presidency. Because, not for myself personally. I had concerns for the First Lady, I will tell you. But if you would have seen what we had to go through with the darkened plane, with all windows closed, with no lights on whatsoever, anywhere, pitch black, I've never seen it. I've been in many airplanes, all types and shapes and sizes. I've never seen anything like it.
I just don't know what to say. The President of the United States goes over and he visits troops in a war zone, in a country that has been a long, hard slog for well over a decade. And he tells reporters, you just wouldn't believe what we had to go through. They actually had to turn the lights off in the cabin of Air Force One. I really don't know how the president endured that. That had to be horrifying for him. Well, keep that soundbite in mind when we tell you this next story. There are new claims about President Trump's mysterious 1968 diagnosis of bone spurs. Now, of course, those bone spurs got him out of military service during the Vietnam War. The family of a now deceased foot doctor who rented his office in Queens from the president's father, Fred Trump, is telling the New York Times that he often told the story of coming to Donald Trump's aid. The podiatrist, Dr. Larry Braunstein, died in 2007. But his daughters say that their father often told them the story of how they came to the aid of a young Mr. Trump during the Vietnam War as a favor to Donald Trump's father. No paper evidence has been found to help corroborate the version of the events described by the two Braunstein daughters, who were Democrats and who disliked Donald Trump, and who also suggested there was involvement by a second podiatrist, Dr. Manny Weinstein, who died in 1995 and moved into a Trump-owned apartment the same year the future president was diagnosed with his bone spurs. Trump told the New York Times in 2016 that a doctor provided a very strong letter about the bone spurs in his heels, but he couldn't remember the doctor's name, nor could he recall which foot it was in.
Why did you not serve in the Vietnam War?
Because I was going to college, had student deferments, and it's a long time ago, had student deferments, then ultimately had a medical deferment because of my feet. I had a bone spur.
Which foot did you have the bone spur in?
You'll look it up in the records. I don't, it's in the records.
2 years before being diagnosed with those bone spurs, Selective Service records showed that Donald Trump had undergone a physical exam, and get this, he had been declared available for service. Trump's deferments at the time were for college, during which time he played football with those bone spurs, tennis with those bone spurs, and, of course, squash with those bone spurs. The White House has not commented. Now, on the other hand, Robert Mueller, who, like Donald Trump, was a wealthy Ivy League student in the 1960s, had a little different experience. As Wired magazine reported earlier this year, in mid-1966, Director Mueller underwent his military physical at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. His years of intense athletics, including hockey and lacrosse, had left him with a banged-up, injured knee. The military declared that it would need to heal before he would be allowed to deploy to Vietnam. Well, once his knee did heal, after years of rehab, Mueller went back to the military doctors. In 1967, just before Donald Trump received his own medical deferment for heel spurs, Mueller started officer candidate school at Quantico, Virginia. And the rest is, as they say, Sam Stein, history. He was awarded I think it was a Navy Cross for valor, but showed great heroism in Vietnam at a time when most young men in America were trying to avoid service.
Yeah, no, I think this says more about Mueller than Trump. Trump was not the only one who used his privilege and access to wealth to get out of conscription. This was a common theme, obviously, throughout the Vietnam War. But Mueller, having recuperated and healed himself, then to go into the draft is a pretty remarkable thing. But yeah, this is Donald Trump's story. I'm not surprised that he found a family friend to give him that diagnosis. We know from his biography that Fred Trump, his father, gave him huge benefits. The massive New York Times report on his tax avoidance schemes and the wealth that he inherited from his father are indicative of a person who was handed basically everything on a silver platter, and then said he had hit a home run. And so this is just one of many biographical details that we know about the president, in which this image that he's created of the self-made man is just not true.
No, it's nonsense. He got about $200 million from his daddy and then went bankrupt, and then had to figure out, Betsy, how to borrow money, which of course leads us to the Robert Mueller investigation. What should we be expecting over the next month or so from Mueller's investigation? They've gone quiet, obviously, over the holidays. Should we expect a lot of activity as we turn to 2019?
My understanding is that Mueller's team is currently working on putting together the major report they're planning on issuing to the Attorney General once the investigation is totally concluded. And then it's very much an open question as to what will happen to that final product. The report, according to the regulations that govern the special counsel, only has to be issued to the Attorney General. The Attorney General is likely either to be Matt Whitaker, who of course famously said definitively more than a year ago that the president did not collude with Russia when he was a cable news pundit rather than a member of Trump's administration. So either Matthew Whitaker is going to be able to decide whether or not that report sees the light of day, or potentially Bill Barr, who Trump has said he's going to nominate to be his next Attorney General. And it's very unlikely that Trump picked Barr for that post without making a deep assessment of how Barr would handle that key decision. But then there's going to be a lot of other potential significant hurdles, including the fact that it's likely that Mueller's report is going to include classified material. Any of that material could potentially need to be redacted. That process could be arduous. And of course, it's possible that Mueller's report will include material that could potentially, arguably, according to the White House, be covered by executive privilege. So we can expect a tense, potentially protracted legal battle over the extent to which the American public and Congress actually gets to see the information and the conclusions that Mueller and his team have come to.
All right, Betsy, thank you so much. And speaking of Matthew Whitaker, there's new reporting that the acting attorney general made a false claim on his resume about academic honors he didn't actually receive. That story straight ahead on Morning Joe.
One aspect of the conflict, by the way, that I will never, ever countenance is that we drafted the lowest income level of America, and the highest income level found a doctor that would say that they had a bone spur. That is wrong. That is wrong.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.